The miracle of the radio station WJYC LP 105.3 FM began in 2009. In preparing for the beginning of Riverside Baptist Church, I contacted pastors to schedule deputation meetings. One of these first meetings was with Pastor Castle at Bethel Baptist Church in Linton, Indiana. This rural church had a 1,000-watt radio station, and they were broadcasting the gospel and Christian music. The day after the meeting, we were just about to leave when someone excitedly said something about getting a radio station and a third channel restriction, but I had no idea what they were talking about. They gave me a phone number and a contact to call, whom they promised would explain everything to me. I called, and they told me that if Congress passed a law removing the third channel restriction, there may be a chance to be able to get a radio station license for the church to use to broadcast the gospel. Following their direction, I completed an application to be ready in the event that Congress did pass the necessary law. After waiting more than 3 years, Congress finally passed the law opening up the FM radio band for new low-power radio stations. The FCC then created a 1-week November filing window for new radio stations. On November 13, 2013, Riverside applied for a construction permit at a cost of $1,000. This paid for professionals to help prepare the application. Since the church all currently had no money to put toward the radio station, I hoped it would be a while before we heard anything. In February of 2014, I received a strange-looking piece of mail from the government. But to my surprise, the FCC had awarded us channel 253 or 105.3 FM. This was a miracle. We now had 18 months to get the station operational. But not having the money or knowledge to construct a radio station, nothing happened except receiving a final 18-month extension. In January of 2015, God brought Frank and Anna Romanello into the church. And after hearing about the radio license, Frank said, "I know of a church that has radio equipment they might give us." Through these new contacts, God provided much of the electronic equipment needed to build the station and put us in touch with Fundamental Broadcasting Network, or FBN, and they helped to build the station. The first step was to find a site for the antenna. After an extensive search of the area, God opened the door for us to move the antenna site to the church property, which greatly simplified the rest of the process. FBN's site engineer, David Robinson, arrived at the beginning of November of 2015 with the purpose of getting us on the air before the November 19th deadline when we would lose the radio license. The work began outside with digging a deep foundation hole and assembling, welding, and bolting a 27-foot steel pole together to hold the satellite dish. After hand mixing the concrete to fill the foundation hole, a crane helped lower the satellite dish into place. Next, the work moved inside where we ran hundreds of feet of wire and cable. We then secured a 50-foot mast to the side of the second floor at the back of the building, and on this rested the antenna. After connecting the electronic components, the satellite feed finally came on the air November 12, 2015 for the first time. After another week of programming, troubleshooting, and adjusting, WJYC LP was operational just days before the deadline. While this allowed us to broadcast, the coverage area was small and spotty as the antenna was below the tree line. As the spring foliage further reduced coverage, we knew that we needed a more permanent system. so we applied with the town for permission to install a 100-foot fixed tower. In the summer of 2016, the town surprisingly approved Riverside's zoning application for the new tower. But a church fire on July 30th, 2016 shut down the station for a month and slowed work on the new tower. While the building was slowly being repaired from the fire, God provided the funds necessary to purchase the 100-foot freestanding aluminum tower. On November 7th, 2016, our contractor dug a 5-foot by 7-foot hole that was 6 feet deep, starting a race against the weather to complete the foundation before the hole washed out or the weather got too cold to pour concrete. There was much work drilling and wiring the reinforcement bars to prepare for the concrete. To keep the foundation and initial tower section level, we constructed wooden frames that extended from the roof so the tower could hang level while the concrete was being poured. On November 25th, the concrete trucks arrived and filled in the giant foundation block with concrete. During the 2017 winter snows, the crews worked to repair the building from the fire, giving us time to decide how to complete the project. The plans had also called for a smaller secondary tower that would allow us to raise and lower the tower with a giant hand crank. The project's big obstacle to install the smaller tower was that the building inspector required us to have a structural engineer draw plans and run calculations. But at a cost of $13,000, this appeared unlikely. During a 2017 summer discussion of the problem, one of the churchmen suggested forgetting about the smaller tower, and instead, he said, let's just call a crane in to raise and lower the tower as needed. So, in order to assemble the tower, we needed to clear some trees and many large branches from the lane where the tower would be assembled and raised. While swaying in a lift bucket 40 feet in the air, I thank God for safety in all of the tree trimming. With the lane cleared, the churchmen now began assembling the 10 sections of the tower. With the building inspector happy, we scheduled the crane to raise the tower. On the morning of the tower raise, September 27th, 2017, sound technicians installed the new radio cable, but the tuned double V antenna appeared too large for the tapered antenna tip and was missing a needed connector. The last-minute backup plan was to use a smaller, complex antenna that hadn't worked on the previous setup. I quickly hand-tuned the antenna by following the printed directions, not knowing that this was a big mistake. With the antenna in place and the crane on site, it was time to raise the tower. Excitement built as the crane hoisted the tower 30, 40 feet into the air. But then excitement turned to shock in seeing that a large branch from a tree near the end of the tower would hit the top 5 feet of the tower, so it could not be raised. With no present way to cut it down, the crane operators suggested disconnecting the other 2 legs of the tower's tripod base. After the last 2 bolts were hammered free, the crane swung the tower around the blocking branch and raised it up higher. Those working on the ground rebolted the 2 legs, and the crane raised the tower into place at last. Even though a volunteer was ready to climb the tower to lower the crane belt, it slid down the tower on its own. Later that day, I drove around the area to check the signal of the new tower. But strangely, it was worse. Stunned by the news, I called David Robinson from Fundamental Broadcasting Network and told him of the poor signal quality and the higher reflected power. It's probably a kink in the cable or an antenna issue, he said. But many efforts to recut the cable ending and reinstall a new connector didn't make any difference. After more calls, I finally realized that I had untuned the factory-tuned antenna. So after ordering a new antenna and having a tree service remove the offending branch, we called in the crane for try number 2. In December of 2017, with a new antenna plus a backup antenna and extra radio cables being installed, it was time to finally raise the tower a second time. After raising it in place and securing it in place, later that day I drove a wide circle to find the listening area, and the coverage was at least as good, if not better, than the engineer had calculated. Everything had finally come together to allow us to clearly broadcast the gospel over the radio waves. Praise the Lord for this great victory. But the work is not done. We're now working on updating the program log, and we're also completing a recording studio to be able to record programs. Continue praying for this important ministry that gets out the gospel 24 hours a day. This is WJYC LP FM on 105.3, and this is the miracle of what God has done here in Terryville.